Hi, everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the GSMC Football Podcast. I am your host, Matthew Quinn. We are brought to you today by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We'll be covering the second and third part of our series, in which we'll be covering the season outlooks for each and every NFL team as we go through this offseason. Today we will be covering the Cincinnati Bengals in the first segment, and then in the second segment, the second half of the show, we'll be covering the Cleveland Browns. And make sure you stick around for later in the show, as I'm going to give you my record predictions for each and every one of the teams that we cover. And the Cincinnati Bengals and Cleveland Browns are today, so I'll be giving you their records. Obviously, it's a little early to accurately predict a record because there's still a lot of offseason to go around, scouting combine, the NFL draft, free agency, all that stuff still has to happen. So obviously, those records could change, that prediction could change as we go along in the offseason. But before we go ahead and get into all of that, I do want to ask that you guys like and subscribe, or like and follow the show. We also get a number of questions during the show from viewers, so to ensure that you have your question answered or have your question to the top of the list, please use the tips and donation link at gsmcpodcast.net with your questions. This will put your question again at the top of the list so that I see it, and it also really does help the show. So once again, the link is gsmcpodcast.net, and I do thank you guys for joining me today. And let's go ahead and get into our first segment, as we will be looking into the Cincinnati Bengals. And just to kind of give you an idea of what the Bengals were doing this particular season, or this past season, they kind of had a rough year. If you follow football, they've got loads of weapons on offense. You've got Joe Burrow, who's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. You've got Jamar Chase, who arguably could be the best wide receiver in the league. He had the Triple Crown last year, of course, had a tremendous year. T. Higgins is another one, but we're not really sure what's going to happen with T. Higgins because they might do the franchise tag with him. They had talked about it. I know that was in the headlines the past week or so. So that could be an option for the Bengals there. They have a lot of other things that they need to address, though. But offensively, they're pretty set, when it comes to, big-time weapons. Even their young running back, Chase Brown, he was, effective in a lot of the times, a lot of the games that he played in. He was a real he kind of puts me in the mind of like an Austin Eckler sort of running back, like he's shifty, he's quick, he's got good vision, and, for the most part, he holds on to the ball, doesn't fumble too much. So he was very good last year and kind of a bright spot on an otherwise really bad year for them. But really the issue with the Cincinnati Bengals is not their offense. It's their defense. They were amongst the bottom of the league all year last year, and that's what they're looking to try and improve in the offseason, whether that be through the draft or free agency, or they might swing a trade here or there. You never know, because that's always a possibility. But they've got guys like Trey Hendrickson on the defensive line. He led the league in sacks last year, so obviously he's a great player, and that's another guy that's coming up on a contract negotiation that they're going to have to try and figure out. They've got that, and they've got the T. Higgins mess, and they've got the Jamar Chase situation. He's still going to be looking for a big-time payday, and he is well worth the money because he's arguably the best receiver in the league, as we stated before. So they got a lot of questions, so it'll be interesting to see how they handle their offseason. You take a look at the offseason or the offense that the Bengals had last year. Joe Burrow, on any other year, the numbers that he had, that's an MVP type season. He had 43 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, but he was also sacked 48 times, so obviously the offensive line is an issue, and it's been an issue for a number of years since Burrow's been there. But they haven't really addressed it the way they should. And especially last year, with that offense playing as well as they did, the offensive line was really the real issue on offense anyway, because he got hit a lot, but luckily, he's had some injury issues in the past, but luckily for the most part, he was able to stay healthy last year, and you saw what he was capable of. Everybody that watches football knows how good of a quarterback Joe Burrow is. So obviously you want to protect your franchise quarterback as much as possible, and that's something that the Bengals really need to focus on when they're talking about their offense. But as I said before, really the offense wasn't the issue last year for the Bengals. It was that defense. They were near the bottom of the league in just about every statistical category, whether it be passing yards allowed per game, points allowed per game, rushing yards allowed per game. All of those stats are pretty much near the bottom of the league. I think the highest ranking that I saw when I was doing the research was they were ranked 19th in the league in pass defense. So, obviously, if that's your best ranking on defense, then that's kind of a problem. They've got some free agents that they're going to be looking to maybe re-sign. They might let go just to save some cap space. I'm not really sure there, but you got B.J. Hill on the defensive line. He's scheduled to be a free agent. Mike Hilton, the slot corner, he's also scheduled to be a free agent, and he is a big-time playmaker. For all of the negative talk that the Bengals defense gets, Mike Hilton always seems to have a solid year. He's an explosive type of slot corner. He's a good blitzing corner, too. He spent time in Pittsburgh, and, I was well aware of how talented he was then. And when he went to Cincinnati, I knew he was going to be successful, and he has been because he is that good of a player. I mean, he is kind of getting a little older now, so maybe he's not as dynamic as he used to be, but he's still worth keeping on that defense, a defense that really doesn't have a ton of playmakers outside of Trey Hendrickson. So you want to keep as many good bodies as you can on that defense to try and get it to improve. But if you look at the defensive side and what they may be doing this offseason, you take a look at the scouting combine that we talked about yesterday. There were a number of guys on the defensive line that are prospects. That's a very deep defensive line class, as we talked about yesterday. They could be looking to get somebody. And that's the thing is, you don't necessarily have to be picking in the top 10, which luckily they are, but you don't really have to be picking in the top half of the draft in order to get a playmaker on defense, on the defensive line. It's that deep of a class that you could get a guy on day 2 or day 3 that could potentially still be a day 1 starter or day 1 contributor for you. So that's something to look forward to if you're a Bengals fan. Also, what you want to look at as far as their defensive line goes, they've got Trey Hendrickson. They need to lock him up so that you don't have another hole that you have to fill on defense. That's the last thing that they need, is more guys that they need to sign. They've already got enough issues with the Jamar Chase and T. Higgins thing that you got to get your defense sorted out. As the Super Bowl proved, having a great defense still is extremely vital in today's NFL. I know the NFL was kind of catered towards offenses for the most part, but you still need that strong defensive line, that strong secondary to be able to have, a legitimate chance to win a Super Bowl. Because you got to think, especially with the Bengals being in the AFC is loaded with quarterback talent. You've got, of course, Patrick Mahomes. You've got Lamar Jackson. You've got Josh Allen. Even, Justin Herbert from time to time is still a good quarterback. He hasn't necessarily, gotten to the level that, Los Angeles fans may want, but he is still a talented quarterback, But we're not talking about the Chargers, but that's just another quarterback that they're going to have to deal with, So that's kind of the way the AFC is. You need to have a quarterback that can match those other quarterbacks, but you also need a defense that can contain those quarterbacks, because it's pretty hard to stop any of those guys that I just listed. But your best hope is that you want to contain them as much as possible and limit the damage they can do to you on defense, on your defense. So that's something that they're going to be definitely looking for. If you take a look at just the numbers, they're about 60 mil over the cap, or 60 mil in cap space, I should say. So, they definitely have some wiggle room there. But, of course, like I said before, they've got guys on offense that they need to pay, guys that are looking for contracts. T. Higgins has been the most common one that has been talked about this offseason, just because there was threat that he could potentially leave, but they're saying they're going to put the franchise tag on him. They're still not 100%, there's not a 100% decision in that scenario right now, because there's still a possibility that he could go somewhere else if he decides to not sign that franchise tag and maybe hold out, or whatever the case. But he's a guy to look out for. You definitely want to keep him because he is one of the best receivers in the league as well, and he could go somewhere and be their number one receiver. He's that good. The Bengals have two number one receivers, which is a luxury that not many teams are afforded. So it's definitely something that the Bengals definitely want to hold on to for as long as they have Joe Burrow, at least. But as long as they do have Joe Burrow, they're still going to be in games. They're still going to have a chance to win games. I mean, even last year with their defense as bad as they were, there were a lot of games that they lost by just like one possession, That just kind of shows you how good that offense is, because Joe Burrow and the offense knew that each and every week, just about, they would have to come out and put up 30 plus in order to have a chance to win. And that's definitely not the way you want to, run your team, and especially in today's NFL, But $60 million in cap space, you could go get a guy like a DJ Reed, the corner from the New York Jets that's set to be a free agent this offseason. He's one of the top free agent corners that may be available. You could see them go after a guy like that. They still have Trey Hendrickson again, like I said, so maybe they don't dip into free agency with, defensive line, especially with as deep as the defensive line class is in the NFL draft in a couple months here. So that's definitely something that they, would look into. Another issue that I think bears mentioning is Zach Taylor. There's a potential that he could possibly be coaching for his job. He's had too many years where the Bengals have gotten off to a really slow start. They'll get into like an 0-3, 1-4 type of hole, which was the same issue they had last year. They continuously have to dig themselves out of holes. And that's not something that you want on your resume as a head coach, especially when you've got an offense that is loaded with talent like they do. There's no excuse for them to continuously blow games at the beginning of the year and have to play catch up, basically. They've got a good enough team. They shore up some stuff on defense. They could, be in the running for maybe a potential contender for the Super Bowl. In the AFC, you get the Bengals in the playoffs with a decent defense and that same offense. I challenge you to name any team that would want to play them, because, that is a scary opponent. No matter how good of a team you are, they've proven that they can beat Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. They did it at Arrowhead a couple years ago on their way to that Super Bowl appearance in which they lost to the Rams a couple years back. So they definitely have the ability to beat Mahomes. So that's usually the measuring stick. You want to know, like, yes, my team is good. Yes, my team can be competitive, but can they get past Kansas City? That's what seems to be always the case every single year in the AFC, is like, because they're the top dog. They're AFC champions again this year. Of course, they lost the Super Bowl, but they won the AFC once again for the third straight season. And they are on the top of the mountain in the AFC. So you got to knock them down. So you got a guy like Joe Burrow. He could definitely do that. Shore up that defense. They could absolutely make some noise. So that's the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, Zach Taylor. It's going to be interesting to see how the season goes. If they go ahead and start like a 1-4 record again, like they've been, I wouldn't put it past the Bengals to maybe cut ties with Zach Taylor before the season even ends. And that could spell another disastrous season for the Bengals, which, I'm sure the fans in Cincinnati are getting about tired of, with all the talent that they have on that team, to just continuously waste it like this. It's definitely hard to swallow, So as far as the record, again, this is a really early prediction. So, this could change, of course, depending on who they pick up in the draft and free agency. But right now I have them sitting at a 12-5 record and challenging with Baltimore for the division title. I do think it's going to be a two-team race in that division this year between Cincinnati and Baltimore. Baltimore, we're going to talk a little bit more about tomorrow. But Cincinnati, they have all the pieces there if they can just shore up that defense a little bit. So that takes care of that first one. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about the Cleveland Browns in our next segment. But first, before we do that, we're going to take a little quick break. Once again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them down in the comments. Or tips and donations, feel free to hit that gsmcpodcast.net link and go ahead and type your question in there. Any type of support or donations, greatly appreciated as always. So we will be right back and we'll get into the Cleveland Browns and what they're going to potentially do this season.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign.
All right, guys, and welcome on back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Once again, I am your host, Matthew Quinn. Once again, if you have any other questions or comments, feel free to jot them down in the comments, and I will get back to them on our next episode. Tips and donations, as I said before, gsmcpodcast.net. Go ahead and click that link. Jot down any of your comments or questions if you want that to be read immediately or get your name to the top of the list. So definitely go ahead and do that. Once again, any sort of support is definitely appreciated. So as we move into the Cleveland Browns season outlook, Cleveland. It just seems like every single year this sort of thing happens. They sprinkle in a year or two every now and then where they squeak into the playoffs, have a decent season, but the Browns they're just, pit of misery every single year. And it was no different this year. It was a bad year. They finished 3-14. They're going to have the number 2 pick in the draft, which is a positive, of course. But a negative is that they're $28 million over the cap space, because a lot of that has to do with them signing Deshaun Watson or trading for Deshaun Watson a few years ago. They got him a massive monster contract that they're still paying for, right now, especially with Deshaun Watson. Since he's got to Cleveland, he has not materialized into the guy that they want, the guy that we were used to seeing when he was in Houston, when he was making dynamic play after dynamic play, and you felt like he was just a couple of pieces away from being that kind of quarterback that could compete in the AFC and just the NFL in general. So when he went to Cleveland originally, there was a lot of baggage there. I mean, there still is baggage there with Deshaun Watson. We won't get into all of it because most everybody knows exactly what's going on with Deshaun Watson and all the off-the-field issues that he had. That was a big hurdle that the Browns were trying to climb even when they signed him. And, they gave up a lot of capital and draft and a lot of money to get that guy, and it just has not worked. He has been a shell of his former self since he got to Cleveland. Has not been good at all. That's definitely something you got to think that he may be on the roster next year just because of his injury, and he's not, but I just don't think that he's going to be the guy next year. They're going to be looking to try and get a quarterback in the draft, I believe. I think they could look towards Cam Ward to potentially come in. I don't see Shedeur Sanders being a viable option for them. I know that they could, theoretically get him because they're the number 2 pick. But I think that Cam Ward would be a better fit for Cleveland than Shedeur Sanders would. So they could potentially get him. That's obviously a guy who's a rookie. He's not one of those guys that, you've seen like in past years drafts where they're like, okay, this guy is an instant starter. He's going to make a difference as soon as he comes in, much like how C.J. Stroud did for Houston a couple of years ago when he was a rookie. I don't really get the feeling that that's the kind of quarterback that Cam Ward's going to be. I could be very wrong in that assessment, but it's just there's just not enough evidence to support that. He's had a decent college career, but nothing that really blows your hair back, So look at possibly them going after him. If they don't go after him, Maybe they go after offensive line, although I think you could get an offensive lineman in the second round and not spend a number one pick on that. Obviously, there's not a whole lot that they can do free agency wise. They're going to have to cut some guys, restructure some contracts just to free up some free money. Obviously, the salary cap increasing over, the past couple of days, or, last week or whatever it was when Roger Goodell did the increase in the salary cap, that definitely helps the Browns, but it's not enough. They still need to do some restructuring, some cuts, whatever the case, just to free up some more money, just to really even be able to sign their draft picks that they're going to have. So this whole Deshaun Watson thing has just been a domino effect for the Cleveland Browns. And now you've got their best player, Myles Garrett. He wants out of town. And, it's hard to really say that I blame him. This guy is a perennial defensive player of the year candidate each and every year. And he's not really getting anywhere in Cleveland because they just can't get out of their own way. And it's been like that for decades. For as long as I can remember, the Browns have been bad. They've had a couple of years, like I said before, where they've been decent, but got to the wild card round. They even beat my Steelers a few years ago, back when they had Baker Mayfield, who they should have kept, by the way, but that's a whole another story. But they've had a couple of years here and there. But for the most part, there's not really a huge future there right now, not with the way the salary cap is looking and just the general state of the team right now. They still have some decent players on defense, so it's not all bad, because you got a guy like Denzel Ward, who's one of the best young corners in the league. He's really, really good, always makes plays. Myles Garrett, obviously, best player on that defense. Losing him would be catastrophic to this team, I think. They were 3-14 last year. You lose a guy like Myles Garrett, I feel like that drops your record potentially even lower than that, which is crazy to think because it's only 3 wins that they had last year. But that's what kind of guy that Myles Garrett is. It's the kind of player that he is. You need to have him in your lineup because he is that X factor on defense. So that should be their top priority when it comes to defense, is finding a way to make Myles Garrett happy. It didn't seem like there was much that they could do based on the post that Myles Garrett had when he originally announced that he wanted to be traded. It was pretty, definite goodbye that he's head to the city of Cleveland. So I don't know if there's a lot that they can really do because they don't have the cap space. You could say that maybe he could stay if, they go and they sign like a big name quarterback or, some big name receivers, or whatever the case, to pair with, Jerry Jeudy, because Elijah Moore looks like he's on his way out as he's set to be a free agent. But they still have the Jerry Jeudy trade that they got from the Denver Broncos last year, and he proved that he is a talented receiver. He's made some big plays. He's a guy that you could definitely have as your number one guy. Maybe draft a receiver, somewhere in maybe day 2, because I feel like day 1 they're going to be using their draft pick on a quarterback. So you got to think that maybe they'll go after skill positions later on in the draft, day 2, day 3, something like that. But, right now, you got to also look at another guy that was a cornerstone piece of this Browns offense when they were successful, and that's Nick Chubb. Do they bring him back? That's a big question that, is on a lot of Browns fans' minds, because he is a free agent. And he's been a really, really good running back, but his issue is injuries. He had a really, really bad injury a couple years ago against Pittsburgh, that knee injury that knocked him out early in the year, and he was gone all year. He didn't even come back into the Cleveland Browns lineup until mid-season this past year. And when he was in the lineup then, he just didn't look like the same guy. You could tell the injury was definitely affecting him. And then to top that all off, he had an ankle injury in week 15 that kept him out for the rest of the year this past year. So are they willing to give him another contract, especially with the cap situation, when they're not really 100% sure what his health is going to be like? That's a big risk that you take there with Cleveland. Coaching-wise, I still believe that Kevin Stefanski is the right man for the job there. I think he's one of the most underrated coaches in the league. He's won Coach of the Year before, too. So, it's pretty crazy to say that he's underrated. But when you're the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, that tends to happen. Yes, they don't have a great record, but he is still a good coach. There's only so much that even great head coaches can do with a subpar lineup. Even look at Bill Belichick with the Patriots after Brady left. They had several down years, where they just were not good. Because as great as a coach as Bill Belichick is, you still need a franchise quarterback. Otherwise, you're not going to go anywhere. That's just the way of the NFL. So those are a lot of questions that Cleveland's going to need to answer. At the wide receiver position, there's a guy that they could potentially go after, although he probably won't be available considering the Browns are most likely going to use their first-round pick on a quarterback. But you got a guy like Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. He's an Ohio guy, so it makes sense that they might, potentially try and go after him. Maybe they trade up, from a pick in the second round and add a player. Maybe they use Myles Garrett in a trade to get an additional first-round pick. Then they could build the team a little bit more. That's definitely an option as well. I know they said that they don't want to trade Myles Garrett, and I don't blame them. But at the end of the day, if he's not going to be willing to play for you, then you're going to have to do something. You can't just have him taking up a roster spot if he's going to hold out because he's not getting traded or, whatever the case, whatever he decides to do. So it's definitely something that they need to address. Egbuka is a good fit there, I think, but I just don't think he's going to be available because of all the other needs that the Browns have. Most likely, I do think they will go quarterback, and I think it's going to be Cam Ward. But as far as their record prediction, I don't see it being much different than it was last year. I have them sitting at a 4-13 record, so one win better, just because I feel like they will get a quarterback, and it's got to be better than the quarterback situation that they had last year. So I give them an additional win. But I still don't think that they're going to be much of a team. I think they will be at the bottom of the AFC North, and that record is going to be 4-13. That's just what I have it as right now. Obviously, it could change if more players get added or, whatever the case. So that's it for the Cleveland Browns. Once again, I do appreciate all of you guys for listening to the show. And once again, I just want to double remind you that you can go onto our super chat, gsmcpodcast.net, that link to get your super chat talked about or a comment or a question answered, pre-recorded show. So obviously just shoot your comment down in the comment section and I'll try and get to it on our next show. So once again, I do appreciate everybody joining me. I appreciate all the support. And I look forward to talking to you guys on our next episode. So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you guys soon.